Hey everybody, Brantley here, welcome back. Section 3, Sculpting Blender Models. This first video is going to be on sculpting to add detail to our base mesh. So if you'll recall, before we made a base mesh of a Lego motorcycle, which we're not going to sculpt on, but we also made a base mesh of the ice sword from Game of Thrones. So we are going to sculpt on that. And before we dive right in, I want to do a quick overview of sculpting and the different methods to do so within Blender. So the first sculpting that we're gonna do together is called multi-resolution sculpting. So this is the original method for sculpting in Blender, where you would add the resolution modifier to your base mesh or to your object to increase the mesh's vertices or polygons in order to sculpt. So when you're sculpting on an object, it needs to have enough mesh, to put it bluntly, to be able to make those fine details that are in the mesh. So the first picture here on the left with the cube is, you wouldn't be able to really sculpt on that. You would go in and try to do detail, and there's just not enough polygons, because it literally, if you look up at the top, it has 8 vertices, it only has 6 faces and 12 tries. So this is a very low poly object. So that's how they classify the two. So you have the low poly and the high poly. And the high poly object that has, for example, on the right-sided picture where I've already added the multi-resolution a couple times, it turned it into kind of a circle. I just took the cube, added the multi-res modifier, and it basically turned it into a circle because it added a bunch more vertices and faces to it. So you can see this one has 98 verts, 96 faces, and 192 tries. So this is a lot more resolutionized form of the square, which would allow us to sculpt more detail to that. And that's only applying the multi-resolution modifier 2 times, and you can up that all the way up to, I'm not sure what the max number is. The max I've ever gone to is 5, which adds plenty, especially if you're trying to do the multi-res on like a character or something like that. It already has quite a bit more faces as you build out the object, which when we get into our sword in the multi-res, I'll show you how many vertices and faces and tries we have on that, and then we'll add the multi-resolution modifier to it. But just to suffice it to say, you need to have enough polygons, enough mesh, enough resolution to be able to sculpt fine details, because all those details are going to take those little bitty triangles and faces, and it's going to make them into the detail that you want, like a groove or a chink in the armor or a cut. So that's the multi-resolution sculpting, which we're going to do first, and we're going to prep our sword for this sculpting. The other sculpting is dynamic topology, and this is a newer form of sculpting. It uses an algorithm. It's a newer method for sculpting with a sort of auto multi-res effect. So basically, these are for artists that instead of creating the base mesh for an object, maybe they can just go in and start creating something straight from their minds. And you can actually use this sculpting tool to take the square. For example, here on the left side I have the normal square with 8 verts, 12 tries, and then you can see where I've done dynamic topology sculpting, where I just took my mouse, selected dynamic topology in the sculpting screen, and started sculpting on it, and it started creating all this mesh as I went along sculpting, and just kind of put it over the square there. And you can see it added a lot of vertices from 8 to 786, from 12 tries to 1,568 tries if you look at the top there on those pictures. And this is where the algorithm decides the resolution modifier to increase your mesh's vertices or polygons while you sculpt. So you could essentially take a square or a circle or whatever base shape and go into dynamic topology and kind of just create your character or whatever. If you're able to make something from your mind in that sort of way and just kind of create stuff out of nothing with the dynamic topology, then that's where you can do it. And a lot of artists do that and make very good items from that. Me, on the other hand, I like to have kind of a base mesh that I can kind of create my base form And also, the multi-res sculpting is good for if you want to put your items into video games, because if your item has way too high of a resolution, the video game doesn't like to, it can't process it quick enough in order to have, if you have super high resolution characters everywhere in the game, it's just going to lag on whoever's trying to use the game. There's just computers, even with their immense capabilities nowadays, can't handle, let's say, like Toy Story characters or any type of movie where they do high resolution characters. If you were to try to put those into a video game, it would just totally not work. Just wouldn't be able to compute. Yeah, so the other type of sculpting is better for video games just because you start with a low poly character and then you create a high poly with details. And then there's a way that we're going to get in later into this course where you can actually bake those details, and it kind of puts it onto a low poly character and makes it look real despite not having so many vertices and tries and faces and stuff. So those are the two forms of sculpting, the multi-res sculpting and the dynamic topology. We're going to do both to work on our sword, and since we're not exactly trying to put our sword into a game at this point, we could eventually, that's why I started with the base mesh, so we could easily and put that into the game, and we'll probably go over that in the future in this course, but we can do either or and just kind of have our fun with sculpting and putting details into our sword. So without further ado, let's hop into Blender. Alright, so here we are with our sword here. I went ahead and made some changes from this other one. I took out this cylinder because I realized that when we did the multi-resolution, it didn't quite mesh very well with the sword. So I am going to have this available where I just basically cut out that extra cylinder and just unified the mesh all the way through on this handle and just kind of made it a little thicker. If you want to take that as a challenge, you can definitely do that. You can take the cylinder even and keep it in the middle and then join it with the top part and the sword hilt and just kind of make it one fluid mesh by using the edge. If we go into tab, let me show you what I'm talking about. So select our sword here and tab into edit mode. You can see where I basically just cut it off here and just had the mesh seamlessly cut it off here, had the mesh form up top there. And basically what you do is you can select an edge loop all the way around and then the other object's edge loop and use the Control E, which is the hotkey for edges, the tools that you can use for edges, and there's a bridge edge loops. So if you have two edge loops selected, let's go into our other, let's tab back into object mode and go into here. Let's say you take this, you tab it into edit mode, you hold Control or Option and select that whole edge, and you can see how the edge selects there. If you hold that, select that edge there, and you can bridge it to something else. If you select another edge loop, you hold Shift, select the other edge loop, and then bridge it together. And that's basically how I did it. If not, I also am going to make this file available for the beginning of this course on the GitHub forum. So this file is already available to you, and you can skip all that and just go right here to where I've corrected everything. So let's go ahead and get this ready for sculpting with the multi-resolution. So we have our object here. It's all one mesh. We've joined it together so we can go into sculpting mode with it directly. And what we want to do is I'm going to show you how multi-resolution will kind of lose some of the form, and we might want to go back and change our base mesh a little bit to fix that. So if you go ahead and press A to select or right click it to select your sword, go over here to the properties panel. Properties over here, you might be on this section here, so you're going to want to go to Modifier, which is this wrench. You click on that, you add the modifier, and it's the multi-resolution modifier right here. Now you have several options here. We don't really want to go do simple. This is kind of the basic algorithm that it's going to use. Everything, the defaults are good in this case. So what we're going to do is go ahead and click subdivide, and what that's going to do is every time we click subdivide, it is going to add a new level of subdivision or more resolution. So you can see right now we have 840 verts, 839 faces, 1,672 tries in our base mesh. Let's subdivide this. And you can see already that this is more than doubled. And you can also see that on our sword we lost a little bit of our edges here, because like when I made the cube and I subdivide it, it kind of made it into a circle because you're just adding more polygons and it's making it more resolution, and so it's rounding it out. So in order to fix that, let's subdivide this a few more times just to kind of see what our final look will be. So if this is subdivided 4 times, which is a good start to do, that adds plenty of vertices and faces for our sculpting. Now if we were to tab into edit mode, it shows our original item because we haven't applied this modifier yet. And that's kind of important. You really don't want to apply it just yet until you're sure that that's the resolution you want to go with, because you will lose your base mesh at that point. We do have our other sword over here saved, so in the different pieces, so we'll always have our base mesh over there, and so you could always just duplicate that and bring it over if you mess up. But rule of thumb is just to not apply your modifiers until you're for sure that that's what you want to do. So now to fix this rounding of the blade here, everything else looks great. I mean, the tip of the sword is great, looks like a sword. It's just this little rounding up here kind of takes away from the blade being a blade, where it has like a square end and then the pointy end. And so we can go ahead and X out of this, bring it back here, tab into edit mode. And one of the ways we can save some of our mesh here is we can actually add another loop to this. So as I was saying, we could add another loop in here, and if we zoom in real close, I just added this one little loop here. I did Control R and it brings up a pink one here, and you can use your roll bar to add more cuts if you want. Let's just do the one. Left click it so that it's there, and then you can move it up and down, and I basically just put it right there. And once you add this edge loop, you're going to notice that, and let's get rid of that because I already did it, just add it right there after you do Control R here. You're going to notice that now that one more polygon here, and it has this edge loop where it's going to try to maintain its form, you'll notice that when we tab back over to object mode and add our multi-resolution modifier now, that now it's maintained its form a lot more. It's not so curved now, and it kind of actually looks like a sword. So I think that suffices it for now. So awesome, we fixed that issue, and now our sword is pretty much ready for sculpting. And when we sculpt, we can probably add more mesh to add the circle here. We can add more detail to the handle. We can add the grooves that the sword has. Let me see if I can find the preview. We have it right here. So here's the preview of the sword. We can add this little bubble thing with the sculpting. I'm hoping, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm pretty sure we can accomplish that. We can add more detail to the handle. Not really too much detail. I mean, we can make it show that this is a different material than this one by adding these grooves and also these little cuts right here where the handle kind of molds to the sword. And then we can also add these grooves in here that kind of add depth to the sword and its design. So super excited to get back to sculpting with this, and we can start our multi-res sculpting. I'm going to show you how to use the sculpt tools. And on this sword,